Reel in the field goals. It is Friday, the 27th of May in the year 2016. This is Kenneth Arthur. With me, as always, is Danny Kelly, and we're coming at you every week to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. Danny, for those that are uninitiated, can you sort of explain what the Seahawks are?
They're a team in the National Football League. They play American football. And
Back it up.
Okay.
What is football?
No, we're not going to do that. We don't have time. We got Stephen Cohen here, and we can't waste any of his time.
I guess. Okay. Well, sorry. For those that are listening that don't know what football is, sorry that my co-host is sort of going to rob you of that, and you're probably going to be lost over the next 30 to 60 minutes. So just try and, I guess, keep up. Maybe you want to pause the podcast, go to Wikipedia, check it out, football. When you make your way to the Seahawks 2016 season, hit play on the podcast once again. And this week, our guest is Stephen Cohen of the Seattle PI. Now, if you want to, you can also, I'm sure the Seattle PI has a Wikipedia. Go back, learn about journalism, find out what that is, and then you'll start to, by the time you get to Stephen Cohen, hit play on the podcast. And Stephen, have you done that to yourself? Have you created your own Wikipedia page yet?
Sorry, hold on. I'm just finishing up this football article on Wikipedia.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, what was the question?
When are you gonna make a Wikipedia page?
I don't know what status you have to get a Wikipedia page, but I don't know. I guess I'll invite all listeners of the Reel in the Field Goals podcast to maybe construct one and just fabricate as much as they possibly can.
I think, yeah, that is an open invitation to anyone listening. You've got you got two great guys and Kenneth Arthur here, so just make the Wikipedia pages for us if you think that we're notable and if Wikipedia allows it. I mean, yeah. You got Danny Kelly. We just found out he's a writer for The Ringer, and so that's notable as well. So
Woo!
I might finally get him. I might finally get a Wikipedia. There's another Danny Kelly on Wikipedia, but he's like a British guy.
Your enemy.
I think there's a Stephen Cohen on there who is a billionaire who supports Vladimir Putin. So I get some interesting emails from time to time.
Well, yeah, especially, I mean, that's what you guys have in common besides the name.
Right, I'm a huge supporter.
Big Putin fan.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin. It's been quite the domination of the Seattle Seahawks recently, and they started out with some OTAs this week. And Stephen, you were there. You've seen what's going on. You've heard the press conferences. We're going to ask you some questions about what your perspective on this the OTAs that are going on. I made the joke about Wikipedia and learning about football, but this is a serious question. Can you explain what OTAs are? And what is the rules as far as what the team and Pete Carroll can do during OTAs? What are they figuring out?
Yeah, so OTAs it's part of the third phase of the off-season program, which anytime you talk about the off-season program in the NFL, it sounds like some sort of plan to world domination, likely because the off-season program for the NFL is sort of a plan to world domination. But the third phase is when you can see players actually take the field against one another. So you can have offense against defense in 11-on-11 drills, 7-on-7, 7-on-9, but it's still not live contact. So it's still sort of fake football with guys running around without their helmets on and sort of playing touch football out there. But that's mostly what OTAs consist of. There's 10 of them. The media is allowed to go to 3, and we were allowed to go to our first one on Thursday.
Do you like going to those? Is it enjoyable to watch, or is it pretty much just boring?
It's how do I say this? I want to keep my job, so I like going to them. No, it's always exciting when you get there, and you see the players you haven't seen in a while, and you check in. But then it is after the first 45 minutes, you kind of look at everybody else there, and all the reporters are so there's 45 more minutes of this, and then you just there's a temptation, and I kind of made fun of it last night. I was tweeting out every last detail I could remember about the session, but because it's the only thing going on, there's a temptation to just read way too much into every piece of minutia there. So, that can be a little bit tiresome, but at the same time, it's football, so it's pretty fun according to the Wikipedia article.
At least you're not covering the Bills, right?
Oh my gosh. yeah, that is a nightmare. And that media policy was just draconian.
Yeah, so we'll say thanks to the Seahawks for letting us do this with Steven. Well,
Yeah,
not directly, but
yeah, yeah,
um, we'll go because if you're not familiar, the Bills basically said you can't say anything about their practices at all, basically.
yeah. You can
Um,
confirm that there were practices. I think
yeah,
that's basically all you could do.
which is totally ridiculous because I mean, frankly, like we just said, none of this really actually matters. So like barring people from talking about it is kind of silly, but it is interesting anyway. I mean, it really doesn't matter, but it is fun to kind of start imagining how the product is going to look during the season. With that in mind, let's just get right into it.
Yeah, beats work.
Russell Wilson. I mean, Brock Heward was able to go to an OTA a couple days ago, and he said he just looked dialed in. I don't think he said he didn't miss any passes the whole practice. What was your impression of Wilson this practice?
Yeah, he looks great. I don't know that I would say he didn't miss any throws on Thursday. I think there were a couple he'd like to have back, but the guy looks, as dialed in as we've seen him. He looks comfortable in the pocket. He's running a little bit less in the pocket. It was funny. My first exposure to the Seahawks was a couple of years ago, and watching how many times he would extend a play in practice, kind of beyond the limits of what was actually possible in an NFL play, and you would see the defenders just sort of get frustrated by it and laugh about it because he's just continuing to go and he can't get hit. This year the ball's coming out quicker. There's not these long crazy plays where he's scrambling all over the place. I don't know if that's by design or if that's just because he's feeling more comfortable with his reads. He knows where to go with the ball, things like that. But not a lot of turnovers, not a lot of errant throws. He's working in some of the new guys, but I think you can tell that the rapport with the guys who are returning, Baldwin, Curse, Lockett, Luke Wilson, is really good. So I think that all bodes well for him this next season.
Stephen, with the in regards to like in general looking at the practices and were there any of the new guys, whether it be rookies or whether it be maybe guys that were on the practice squad last year or guys that they signed in the off season, among the new guys, were there a couple that stood out as guys to watch over the summer?
Casey Williams had a really good day on Thursday. He had a couple of really big catches, including a couple that were just kind of highlight reel deals where he went up and grabbed them at the highest point. So he's a guy he's going to have to prove it on a day-to-day basis, and then he's also going to have to carve out a place for himself on special teams if he wants to make this team. Because like I mentioned before, the top of that receiver depth chart's set. There's going to be no surprises there. But those last couple of spots are going to be really, really competitive, and there's going to be all sorts of different types of guys there. Between Case and Williams, a guy like Kevin Smith, Kenny Lawler, the seventh round pick. Paul Richardson needs to prove that he can stay on the field. And so Case Williams is a guy who has shown some flashes, but has never really been consistent enough, and he's never been able to find a role on special teams. So if he does that this offseason, there's a chance he makes this team. If he doesn't, I think it's not going to happen for him.
What style of receiver is Casey Williams? Like, I obviously Pete Carroll's talked about how he likes guys with specific skill sets and all that, and some of them might be unique. But if you had to categorize him as like a different, is he a possession guy? Is he a deep threat?
Yeah, I'd say he's a possession guy. The guy who comes to mind, and he's not a perfect fit, is Anquan Bolden because he's big and physical. And Casey Williams is he's built a little bit like a running back. He's 6'2", I think like 214, but he's thick. And he's got nice long arms. He can go up and get the ball. He doesn't get a ton of separation, which is the thing that makes me think of Bolden. But he's good at the contested catch. So I think best case scenario, he's a guy who can kind of come down with those one-on-one balls outside where he's got to beat his defender, and can maybe maneuver in traffic a little bit inside too. But he's definitely kind of the physical possession guy.
That makes sense. And keeping on the quarterback thing, going back to Russell Wilson, obviously right now Tavares Jackson remains unsigned, so we don't really know who the backup quarterback is at this point. Jake Heaps is out there, Trevon Boykin. Heard some good things, I think, about Boykin the last couple of weeks. Did he stand out for anything? Did he look like he kind of was comfortable in that, or was he sort of looking like a rookie?
Yeah, I mean, both. At different times he looks pretty comfortable and he looks like he sort of gets it. At other times he just looks like a rookie because he's just kind of getting used to the speed of this game and things like that. I think he can be a backup. I think it's a tough ask to ask an undrafted rookie to be the number 2 right away. I think he could do it because he's a guy who has a lot of starting experience in college, and there is something about guys who are just sort of the alpha male quarterback types who just can kind of take charge of a huddle, and they know how to talk to guys, how to encourage guys, how to get on guys. He seems to be one of those guys. So he's got a ways to go, I think, to prove that before they're comfortable with him just being the number 2. But I think there's like a kernel of that there.
Steven, speaking of Vladimir Putin, communism is a thing that's always been said good in theory but bad in practice. The offensive line, good in theory, but how are they looking in practice?
Oh my God.
Wow.
That is the best question I've ever been asked. Well, much like communism, you're only as good as your weakest link. And I don't know, man. They didn't look great yesterday. And partially it was because they were without the 2 guys who were going to start at tackles, with Gary Gilliam out with a minor surgery that we found out to remove a cyst from the knee, and then Jamarcus Webb out with a calf injury. So with that starting line there, when you're looking at like a guy like Bradley Soul and Terry Poole starting at tackle, it was a little rough. And again, it's really hard to judge in practice because this isn't full contact, but just the eyeball test, it's not good. And there were a couple of times where guys just came in untouched and would have absolutely creamed the quarterback had it been a live session. So the interior looks okay. And Justin Britt, he had one bad snap like right away, which was just kind of unfortunate for him as he's trying to make this impression of being a potential starting center in this league, and like one of the first couple of snaps went right over Wilson's head. But the 2 guards I think are going to be okay. I think Glowinski is going to be fine. I think Ifedi's potentially, I think he has the potential to be one of the better linemen on the team, year 1, just because of the physical skills he has. He's going to have a learning curve there, but he's a mountain. He's a huge dude, and he moves really well. And so I think that they won't be too upset with what they've got in guard. But outside, it remains to be seen kind of what they'll be able to put together there.
Do you have any sort of sense yet? Do you think, or maybe just a hunch as far as the guys that won't make the team that we've been sort of circling around, like Christian Sokoli, or Terry Poole was out there yesterday, or Patrick Lewis? If there's all this competition ahead of them for center, why isn't Patrick Lewis the guy? Do you have any hunches of guys that won't make the team?
I don't think Terry Poole makes the team, but that might be just my bias from last season. Terry Poole, to me, when we came in last season, he looked like the most just not pro-ready player on the field. Just wasn't getting it. And so he's dropped a little bit of weight, and I know that they're happy with that, and maybe that does bode well for him in the future, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. Sokoli is a guy who's going to be right on the bubble because I know they like his athleticism, but something's got to click for him to get in there, particularly because they have moved Britt now into that center role, and it kind of adds more bodies to that position. And I think they're going to keep the guys who they feel safest about, if that makes sense. Not necessarily the upside play, at least for the start of this season. I think they kind of did that with Drew Nowak last year. They were kind of hoping for it to click and for the upside to kind of build into better production. It just didn't come, so I think they're going to go with the guys who they feel safest about, and that probably means Britt and probably Patrick Lewis. Lewis didn't get a lot of snaps yesterday, and it was almost like a flashback to last season, and this is not based on anything that anybody's told me, but you get the sense that they kind of know exactly what they have in Patrick Lewis, and so they really want to see what a guy like Britt can do at the position, or what Joey Hunt, the rookie, can do at the position. Last year was a guy like Will Precheck, although he was at guard yesterday. So I think Patrick Lewis is probably a solid bet to make the team, because he did play fairly well over the second half of the year, and he's nice and steady. But I think that they're waiting for these guys to show anything to give them an excuse to kind of put them above him.
I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about this, so you can plead the fifth if it's not something that you're allowed to talk about. But I was curious how they used Nick Vannett and Luke Wilson. Obviously, they talked about Nick Vannett being kind of a Y tight end, the one they've been looking for, or the type of tight end they've been looking for a couple of years. And I'm wondering if that kind of changes the way they use Luke Wilson kind of as more of a receiver potentially. Did you see anything out there? I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about it, like I said, but
Yeah, no, I think we're allowed to talk about it.
Okay.
Honestly, when I noticed Vannett, and partially this is because of how these practices go, because they're not full contact. It's 70% passing plays and 30% running plays.
Right.
But I noticed him more downfield in patterns than I did just as an inline blocker. And again, that's likely just due to the makeup of these practices. But he can contribute as a receiver, I think. He's got a good knack for kind of finding soft spots underneath coverage there, especially in like the deep middle. It seems like he's got sort of a natural feel for that. So I know that they really have touted his blocking ability, and that if that's to be believed, he's going to play sort of a different role than Wilson. But he looked like a guy who could possibly contribute as a receiver too yesterday.
As far as stalling for time, what about Jimmy Graham? Do you think that he's going to be there's the hints that he's ahead of schedule, blah blah blah. Do you get that feeling that he could actually be out there in week 1?
I don't know. I'm probably less optimistic about Jimmy Graham than a lot of people, but it's just because of the nature of that specific injury, and it's not anything to do with Graham. It's to do with the guys who we've seen with that injury before, like Victor Cruz and those guys. Cruz specifically had complications that came out of that, which aren't necessarily related to the first injury, but it's such a long road back. It's one thing to see a guy kind of jogging on the sidelines and seeing if he can run in a straight line and stuff like that. It's another thing entirely to be ready to practice. So I don't know. I think there's no reason to hurry him back onto the field. And so I would be pretty surprised if he's ready for week 1. That said, like they consistently all offseason, they've been talking about how he's progressed really well, how he's doing as much as he can to get back, how he's a little bit ahead of schedule, things like that. That seems to be like a popular offseason narrative for a lot of people that never pans out. But I think they're optimistic about him. I don't know. I would kind of reserve my judgment on that until you actually see him out there being able to cut and things like that. I will say he looks good. The thing you worry about with guys who have this particular injury or any knee injury is that they their legs atrophy a little bit. They look a little bit skinnier in their lower half. But he looks like he's been able to continue to keep his weight on and keep condition. So I think that's a good sign.
Sounds like Alex Collins it sounds like CJ Procise and Zach Brooks both sat out, right? Is that correct?
Yep.
So we maybe got a little bit better look at Alex Collins yesterday. Did you notice anything interesting about him? Obviously, there's not hitting or anything like that, so kind of distills that. Or you can't really tell a whole lot, but how do you look on the hoof, I guess?
He looked okay. For what you could tell, I think he's I think what you can tell is he's like a high-intensity practice guy, which is good. So that fits the mold there. He made one catch, and I think even Russell Wilson mentioned this in the after practice interview, that he wasn't asked to catch balls at Arkansas at all, but he's got really nice hands. And there was one play where he was running like a wheel route, and he got his head around too late for the ball that was coming at him, but he still his hands were good enough that he was able to kind of double catch it and bring it in, even though it really shouldn't have been a catch because of the timing was a little bit off. So I think that probably bodes well. Like he's got some natural ability as a receiver, even if he needs to kind of get coached up to the point where he's comfortable doing it. I think he has the ability to do so. So that's the one play that kind of stands out for him.
It seems like if you're, some of the guys that make this team every year, that it's like, I didn't think of him as a guy that was going to be on the roster, but really it's just a matter of whether or not you can play fullback. Like the guys that can get on by special teams. That's one way to get on, but there's always a competition at fullback, and it's one of the Seahawks are still a team that utilize as a fullback. It's not something that every team is doing anymore. Is Brandon Cottom going to be a guy this year? The guy this year that kind of like, oh, Brandon Cottom is on this team and he's actually out there quite a bit.
Yeah, I think he has a chance for sure. I think he can be sort of that Will Tukuafu type. He obviously doesn't have the versatility as a D lineman, but he's a big guy, really athletic. Played tailback in college, so he can move a little bit. Have yet to see what he's like as a blocker because that's just something that's tough to see at this point in the offseason. But he's a little bit bigger than he was last season, and he definitely looks the part. With these offseason rosters, these guys switch positions, and you see how they're, he's listed as a tight end right now. But his chance to make this team is at a fullback position, and then kind of flexing out of that to block maybe as a tight end occasionally. But he's another guy I think we'll learn a lot about him in special teams too. Like if he's a guy who can contribute there, he has a real chance to make it because they don't have a guy. I think Tani Tupo from UW is the only guy listed as just a fullback on the roster, and he's an undrafted guy who's converting from defensive tackle. So that's a wide open spot. That who knows? I mean, it also kind of I think you have to wonder what happens with the Derek Coleman situation if his legal situation gets resolved. Is he a guy that they look to bring back again too? Because he was a big contributor on special teams. So again, it's early, but I think that is as wide open a spot as you have on the roster right now.
I think one of the most interesting guys to watch during the preseason will be Paul Richardson. And like you said earlier, just kind of has to stay healthy. But thus far, he seems like he's back to full health and kind of running around full speed. Have you seen anything from him like that would indicate he has more potential than maybe some people are giving him right now?
I didn't see the only play I really recall him being a part of yesterday that stands out is a pass that was a deep ball to him in the end zone where he got behind DeAndre Elliott, but the ball hung up there a little bit and Elliott came back to knock it out of his hands at the last second. So that's kind of it. This is going to be a big preseason or off-season for him and training camp because he can play a role if healthy that they don't have on that team of that kind of outside deep threat.
Like Deshaun Jackson light.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think of if you put him, Baldwin on one side, him on the other side, and then Curse or Lockett in the slot. You'd think that opens up a lot of space in the middle of the field just by having him out there. So I know that they'd love to, and I know that he spent a lot of time with Russell Wilson this offseason, kind of working on timing and getting the hang of the offense there. So nothing yet that would indicate to me that he's there, but definitely a guy who we're going to need to watch over the next couple of months because his roster spot's in jeopardy. He's their top pick a couple of years ago, but there's no guarantee he makes the team.
Speaking of Will Tukuafu, let's switch sides and go to the defense real quick. There's a lot of fluidity and competition in the front seven, one of those positions being Bruce Irvin's role. Who do you see sort of standing out or perhaps taking the lead in that regard?
I guess Mike Morgan, but I have no idea. That strong side linebacker is really interesting to me because I was sort of expecting them to address it in the draft, free agency maybe, the draft maybe, and then there wasn't a guy that they brought in who seemingly fills that role. There's a couple of undrafted guys who look interesting, but that's a starting position on the team. That's one of the core 11, unless it's not. And I think that's maybe what the most interesting thing is like what we might be seeing is the Seahawks moving to kind of a hybrid type at that position, whether that's Brandon Browner playing sort of a nickel linebacker safety role, whether that is a guy like, Eric Pinkins earning a spot there. Kevin Pierre-Louis I don't think is built for that job, so as much as people would like to see him sort of challenge for that, I don't think that's a spot where he can line up. So I don't know. It's really wide open. It could be. Yeah, I think there's a good chance that you see Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright play a ton of snaps at linebacker, and then you don't have another true linebacker among the top, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 defenders as far as snaps go. Because I think they might just get more matchup oriented with defensive backs and with some of their hybrid guys like Browner or Deshaun Shedd, who can do more things in coverage there. But yeah, it's interesting. I think if you're looking for a guy who's going to be your traditional strong side, Sam 4-3, it's probably Mike Morgan, but that's almost by default at this point, other than as opposed to anything that he's shown.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be really fascinating because I guess Browner said he's going to be covering tall guys that are like 240 pounds.
Yeah.
And I always come back to the Super Bowl. Obviously, it's not a very fun thing to talk about for Seahawks fans, but after Chris Matthews had such a big first half, I want to say he begged Belichick to let him, come in and guard Matthews, and I think for the rest of the game he was pretty much, shut out.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's the kind of thing they had in mind. Pete Carroll even mentioned that, like they looked at some of the ways he was used in New England and kind of want to try and do that. And so I was wondering the same thing. I was going to ask, like, does this mean we're going to go more big nickel and even dime looks going forward? I think that's kind of what you just like alluded to. Like,
yeah,
they might just try, basically not even running with a Sam all the time. So that's going to be super interesting. Speaking of the defensive backs, obviously it sounds like I was reading through your notes. It sounds like in base they have Jeremy Lane playing outside corner, and then in nickel moving him into the inside and having Thurl Simon come in. How did that kind of dynamic work?
Simon looked good yesterday. He looked aggressive. He had a pick early in 11-on-11s that probably would have been called back for illegal contact, but it's 11-on-11. So, but he was fired up. He made another couple of plays during practice. Made one breakup, I can recall. Did get beat on a seam by Curse on just what was really a great throw by Russell Wilson. Yeah, he was moving pretty well, and I think he's a guy who he has all the measurables that they want, and it's just been a matter of keeping him on the field to get him some momentum so he can actually kind of learn on the job a little bit. He hasn't been able to do that. So if this foot problem is something that had to be corrected through surgery and had to be corrected on one foot and now the other, and now he can actually get out there, I think there's a chance he plays a lot of snaps. I was kind of looking forward to seeing Stanley Jean-Baptiste out there because he's a guy who came with a pretty high pedigree coming out of Nebraska, but he was, at least to start, he's well behind Simon in the rotation there. So maybe that, obviously it's May, so we'll see what happens. But right. But at least to start, Simon was getting a lot more run.
I think like one of the guys that we'll be watching for this year in terms of, hitting that next level, because as positions go, pass rushing and defensive end or what have you, it seems like they all sort of, for the most part, a lot of them take 1 year, the rookie year, to sort of learn and get better and adjust to the game, and then it's really that second year where a lot of these guys either do or don't. It seems like the second year is a huge jump, and if you don't make that jump, you might never make that jump, and it's not surprising to see a guy get 3 sacks and play sparingly as a rookie, and then that second year just sort of dominate. That's sort of like, if speaking, going back to Bruce Irvin, he never really made that jump that we were waiting for. Frank Clark obviously is the guy that I'm talking about going into his second year, and we saw a lot of potential, especially in the preseason, of how dominating this guy could be. So where do you see Frank Clark slotting this season, and do you think that there's a high expectation or belief that he will make that jump?
Yeah, I think that they're really counting on him to be a big part of what the defense does this season. He's dropped some weight. There was a thing where they briefly listed him as linebacker in the roster and then rolled it back and told everybody it was a mistake.
That was weird.
This is not based on, because I have asked people from the team about it and they told me it was just legitimately a mistake. I kind of get the feeling though that, like, I look at him and I see what he does and I'm like, why couldn't he be Bruce Irvin? Bruce Irvin was a guy when they moved him to Sam in his second season, there was no indication he would succeed and be able to drop, that he'd be able to take on the tight end in coverage. And he turned into a pretty good player. I don't see why Frank Clark couldn't do that, but that's kind of an aside. From what they're saying, he's basically a rush end. And so they're going to count on him in nickel packages, dime packages, to rush from the outside, usually from the right side, and just cause a lot of havoc in the backfield. And he looks quick. He looks strong. There's been talk already from Carroll and Schneider a couple of times about how he knows what's expected of him this year, and I don't know if that's something where they're kind of referring back to last season, and maybe he wasn't quite as ready as they thought he was going to be last season, but they're definitely talking about this year. So they've got it in mind to get him on the field a lot, and particularly, if they go to this big nickel that we're talking about, he's a guy who could be on the field a lot with Michael Bennett kind of slotted inside there. I think he's a big part of their plans. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him. I think he played in a third of the snaps last season. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him make a major jump and major jump in production as well.
Stephen, you actually have been kind of more confident about this, I guess, than some people. I've heard this from a lot of people, and I've heard it off the record too, but basically it doesn't sound like the Seahawks would even want Marshawn Lynch back if he did want to come out of retirement. I think you said yesterday that there's a strong indication they wouldn't want him back. What's your whole take on that, the whole Marshawn Lynch thing? Is this just publicity for his company, or is there something real going on here? What do you think of that?
I think, so I wrote a piece on Monday about this because it became clear to me that there's like 4 months of will he or won't he come back Marshawn Lynch pieces in my future, and I just don't want to write them.
Right.
So I thought maybe if I wrote one thing on Monday, it would just get it all over with, and that was a complete failure because there's 4 different things this week. So here's what I think with Marshawn Lynch is there a chance that he changes his mind? Of course there is. It's Marshawn Lynch. If you try to peg this guy, that's a fool's errand. Don't try and predict what this guy's going to do. I think the Seahawks have made it abundantly clear, though, that they're not interested in playing that game with him anymore. This isn't. Remember, he flirted with retirement a couple of times before he actually retired this off season, and every time, we'd ask Pete about it. It was kind of like, they were hoping he'd come back, and they played this game back and forth, and I think they're frankly just tired of it.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that he didn't look very good last year when he was out on the field. I think they're turning the page. Thomas Rawls is coming back, and you hope he's the same guy as he was last year. But even if he's not, even if they don't think he's like the lead bell cow back, they drafted 3 guys. They brought back Christian Michael. They have bodies they can throw at that position, and they're not going to. Nobody's going to be Marshawn Lynch. But I think they've been preparing this offense to move away from its reliance on Marshawn Lynch for a while now. So. I think so people don't misunderstand my point. My point's not that Marshawn Lynch couldn't come back, and that it's beyond a reasonable doubt that he's retired. My point is that if he comes back, I don't think he plays for the Seahawks. I think if he comes back, the Seahawks will release him, and he will sign elsewhere. Because I think they've made it abundantly clear they're not waiting around for him.
Right. Stephen, I want to thank you for your time, and we're going to let you go. I want to ask one more question. It's a trivia question that I asked Spike Friedman last week.
Okay.
And I want to see I feel like I'm going to just start asking everyone this, if you can get it right. What was the Seahawks' record last year?
They were... Hold on. They were 11-5.
They were 10-6.
Yes! I got that wrong, too.
Nobody has gotten it right so far, including myself.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the 10-6 season for the Seahawks last year. Everyone else, I think, thought 11-5 as well.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They're so good that we're just giving them wins that they didn't get.
Yeah, why not?
Stephen, thank you. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on the Twitter at. I literally forgot my handle for a second, so I'm stalling. It's S Cohen PI, SCOHENPI.
Do you
And
ever
then,
get any inquiries as far as private investigation?
well, it's funnily enough, that is my side gig, so that's why I do it as my. So when I'm not reporting on the Seahawks, I'm out solving crimes. It's an exciting lifestyle. And then they can go to seattlepi.com, which is the news and not my private investigation firm.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Stephen. Always a pleasure.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And so there was Stephen Cohen from the Seattle PI. Any thoughts as far as OTAs and the things that we covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like hearing his insights into everything because he has a healthy dose of, obviously take this with a grain of salt type of thing. And that's kind of what we have to do with everything. Right now, it's May. There's not a whole lot that you can glean from the offense or defensive line. They're out there playing patty cake, essentially. No one's trying to get hurt. No one's getting tackled. You can't tell a whole lot from the running backs necessarily, but you can, I think you can tell more from defensive backs and receivers and some of the, like linebackers and things like that, how they're moving on the field, how they're getting into their drops and stuff. So it was interesting to hear what he thought of some of the receivers. Casey Williams obviously was a big standout. Heard a lot of stuff about him yesterday. I thought it was really interesting to hear his theory on the Sam linebacker, because that's something I've been thinking about lately too. Like, they might not even have like a real Sam this year. It'll kind of be like, they play Browner up there in a big nickel situation. Big nickel, for those who don't know, is essentially three safeties on the field instead of three corners. So that's why they call it the big nickel. And it's something that teams have used in the past as their base defense sometimes. And I think that's kind of potentially where the Seahawks are going with it. They'll use him situationally. And then in other situations where they're maybe not having him guard a big, tight end or big receiver, they'll have Mike Morgan in there. They'll have maybe Cassius Marsh in there. Maybe you just play regular nickel. And and then that with no Sam on the field, you can also kind of get more. You can maybe see Frank Clark play sort of a hybrid role where he's dropping sometimes. It's going to be really interesting. I think that was probably the thing that I thought was the most interesting, and I kind of agree with him. I think that's something to watch this preseason during the training camp and everything, is kind of how the whole Sam linebacker thing looks next year.
Yeah, it's almost like Lord of the Rings when Frodo has to go on his own. No Sam.
That's a great analogy of
Big Nickel
situation.
sounds to me like a mobster thing, like a new show coming out, like The Big Nickel, where you're just sort of, that's an area of Boston. Anyway, so like
Hell's Kitchen.
we're gonna wrap it up here in a minute, but the Marshawn Lynch thing is interesting to me because, like, for me, Marshawn Lynch supposedly retired or whatever during the Super Bowl with his tweet, and I was like, oh, that's a thing, okay. And I think it was not like an unexpected thing, and then it was just like, okay, and then I checked out. So then, any Marshawn Lynch news, just sort of like, oh, well, he hasn't officially retired, whatever. I don't care. Until finally, it seems like it's building up to now being a thing where, like, now for the first time, I'm like, wait, is Marshawn Lynch coming back? And it's like, it's totally taken me by surprise, the fact that it's still, is a possibility. What do you, like, if the Seahawks get to, I mean, the Seahawks can say they don't want it back, but they could also get to the point where it's like, if it's August or whatever, and Thomas Rawls isn't recovering the way that they thought that he would, how can you deny Marshawn Lynch?
Yeah, and I think that's the exact argument people are going to kind of take all throughout the year, and it's this isn't going to go away, I don't think. His cousin in a tweet or in an interview mentioned that he's done for the regular season. And so that was kind of implies he'd be down to come back for the playoffs run or whatever. He just doesn't really want to have to deal with the rigors of the regular season. And there were a lot of rumors around the tight end Gonzalez. I think his last I'm blanking on his name. He played for the Falcons. Yeah, there were a lot of rumors around him a couple of years ago coming back for the playoffs for any number of different teams that might be interested in him. So that kind of reminds me of this situation where, a team looking for a hired gun like Lynch, kind of like could like add him for a playoff run.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things that would have to happen with the Seahawks for that to be the case. I think, like you said, like if Rawls is injured and Collins doesn't look good, and Christian Michael's still doing the Christian Michael thing and really inconsistent, I think that's the situation where you could potentially see the Seahawks be interested. But
it's not an insane theory. I mean, as far as it's not a crazy strategy on a part of a guy like Marshawn Lynch to be like, I'm 30 years old. I play the league's toughest position. The average length of a career for a running back is like 2.7 years. It's the shortest for guys that like actually, had made a team or whatever. But, if you're sitting there and you go like, look, you know that teams go into like, we know for a fact that like, someone's going to get hurt, like Arian Foster, where you're going to get in these positions where teams are like, we don't have a running back now and we're kind of good. And it's like, if you're Marshawn Lynch, maybe all you need is week 16 and 17 as like sort of a preseason to like sort of get up to speed and like play with these guys for a minute. Cause I think that you should, but we've also seen like, I feel like you could go back to the Packers in like 2011 or something like that, when they had an injury at running back and it was James Starks or whoever came in that did not play with them all year and then just sort of had a big playoffs. And you see the same thing maybe with like a LeGarrette Blount. If there is a position where you can come in at the end, it seems like it would be running back.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what happened with Christian Michael last year. Like he was on, he was on the practice squad for Washington for a little while. He was a free agent for a little while, and then he came in and was the starter for like 3 games.
And he played pretty well for a while.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't like completely dismiss it as a possibility. I just am in the camp that I don't think the Seahawks would prefer that to happen. I think obviously their preference would be that like the triad of Rawls, Collins, and Michael and whoever else is there precise, that they can handle it and they don't have to worry about, Lynch coming back because, he has Seahawks circus, and a lot of it is like centers around Marshawn Lynch, right? Like he's caused a lot of drama, and frankly, I don't think he likes the Seahawks front office very much. So
yeah,
it's kind of one of those things.
We'll see what happens.
He's so good that like you have to consider it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird situation, which is nothing new with Marshawn Lynch. Everything's a little bit weird always. Yeah. So that's it for this episode. There's, I guess, programming news or field goals news. Danny, do you want to share it with the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to the Ringer.
And what's the Ringer?
Bill Simmons is starting a new website. It's kind of like the new Grantland, but it's not with ESPN. It's kind of an independent thing. And I was honored to get their interest and interview with them and get a job. And so I'm going to be going over there, cover the NFL for them and potentially write about, other stuff sometimes as well, like other sports potentially or pop culture or whatever.
Kind of like what you were doing maybe for the SB Nation NFL site, but with a different sort of maybe reader.
Yeah, with more frequency probably. Kind of the stuff I was doing for SB Nation, where I cover the whole NFL, but probably it'd be a little bit different. But for the most part, it's kind of the same tack. When they contacted me, they said they like what I do, and so they don't want me to change, So that's kind of the plan, and so that's really exciting. And obviously, it means big changes for field goals, but we'll let people know kind of what's going on with that as soon as we kind of figure out, what happens with all that. Right now, we're kind of still in the dark with it, but.
And this, in this podcast, we've been going for about 70 weeks, missing just 1 week along the way, but and doing a lot of the instant reaction and whatnot. And it's been fun, but there is also that's going to come to an end. Don't unsubscribe because I'm still going to be continuing the podcast in a form. So there will still be a podcast here from Field Goals and from like myself and Danny's gonna come back and I guess be a guest from time to time. But also there's also your new Twitter account at Danny P. Kelly.
Right. Yeah. Follow that if you get the chance. Yeah, I'm following in the footsteps of Michael B. Jordan and Chris B. Brown over at Smart Football. I had to be because there's a lot of Danny Kellys in the world, believe it or not. It's a common.
So yeah, then I never, it's interesting when you think of like people's names or like last names, and it's like, oh, I guess I didn't really even think of it. You just sort of, especially when you say their full name. Like I think it's always like, especially if you're like a writer or whatever, it's like Danny Kelly. You don't take that away. I've never even asked, are you related to Jim Kelly?
I am not.
Are you related to R. Kelly?
No, I don't think so. Although my father is also R. Kelly.
Oh, okay.
Not the R. Kelly. He's A.
R. Kelly. Interesting. Yeah. Any other famous people with the last name Kelly?
No, that's it.
Okay.
It is a common name. There's millions and millions of Irish folks. Yeah. It's actually.
Okay, an Irish thing. I think like Machine Gun Kelly. That was a guy.
Yeah. I actually looked for that. This was like so dorky. I was looking to figure out a new handle, and I actually Googled Machine Gun Kelly. There's already a guy who has that. Not that I was going to use that, but I was exploring all avenues. Okay. Some jerk already has it.
You could have gone with like a Kelly Kapowski or something.
That one's probably taken too.
It might be right over the limit as well as character limit. I don't know, but
yeah.
My Michael B. Jordan name is Kenneth B. Arthur, and B. Arthur, of course, Dorothy.
Love the Golden Girls.
But yeah, so that is a change, and that's something to keep an ear out for in terms of how things are going to change at Field Goals. Not all of the questions have been answered in that regard, so that's why we can't really go into further detail about that. But the podcast, I think I have some ideas of where it's going, and Danny is just obligated to do things only for the Ringer, which is understandable because they're paying him $1 million a year. He got sort of Skip Bayless type deal, so that's why. But yeah, it has been real, as I say.
It has been real, and it's crazy, honestly, that we've done 70 episodes. Like that's pretty awesome. I mean, honestly, I'm really proud of that. Because we started out over the years at Field Goals. We've kind of done a few different podcasts, and none of them have really caught on 100%. And I would give all the credit to Kenny on that one though, because he's really been the force behind this. In the background, he's constantly pinging me about what we're doing every week, and so I give you all the credit on that. Like honestly, this has been such a good podcast because of you. So I'm excited for what you have in mind and what happens next with it. I think it's still gonna be really, really good, and I'll look forward to coming back on it as a guest, and hopefully you can get Mina to come on it a lot too, and kind of expand the guest list and all that.
Well, thank you very much. And, the Ringer does podcasts already. Feel free to pitch me.
I will for sure.
Feel free to be like, hey, I know a guy that does podcasts. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And the reason I like to do a couple podcasts every week is, I'm trying to get better at this thing. So, to have someone with your wealth of knowledge, it's been very helpful in making it a worthwhile podcast rather than me just rambling on about nonsense and references that nobody gets. So,
well, I thought it was cool. It was really cool to see when I kind of made the announcement about Ringer. It was cool to see a lot of people were very concerned about the show. Mm-hmm. So it obviously is something that people like, which is huge to hear for us because we do put a lot of work into it. So thanks again for all the listeners who showed concern, and the show will go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of names and not thinking about how their names, we sometimes we'll send each other like questions that we'll bring up, and like for the show, if we have a guest or whatever, and just be like, oh, maybe we should talk about this or this or this. And you called him Harold Simon. Did you see that?
I did. So I use notes in or what is it, Notepad in Mac. Or Text Edit is the program I use, and it has the most maddening autocorrect. It's really frustrating. I literally have to retype stuff like half the time when I'm trying to put in names. So I actually noticed that while we were having the conversation, but it was originally Therold, and
I knew that you knew who he was. It was just funny, look at the name Therold and realized that if you just took away the T, it'd be Harold.
That would change his. I think that would change his persona. Maybe like you know how you kind of are your name. How different would he be if his name was Harold?
Yeah,
Call him
it's
Harry.
different for sure.
Yeah,
Harry, you're a cornerback,
Harry Simon.
Harry Simon. But that was the funny thing. But that's the end of this episode. It's not the end of the podcast though. Follow Danny on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. You can still follow at Field Goals. That's not going anywhere, and there'll still be plenty of Seahawks news coming through there. I'm Kenneth Arthur S. And thanks for listening over the 70 plus episodes and the ones that are to come next. It has been super real in the field. GULLS.